So we are at the 1 year mark from George Floyd's killing. There was a trial, as we know. Derek Chauvin found guilty of murder, but that one incident, the George Floyd killing, led to the BLM movement's second iteration, which involved lots of protests all across the country, stretching on for months, and hundreds of riots and looting and a lot of destruction. Alongside all of that, there was a narrative. The narrative being pushed by BLM was that law enforcement is systemically racist, that unarmed black men are routinely murdered by police without consequence, and that this is an imminent issue that must be tackled. It is the civil rights issue of our era. It must be dealt with right away. And the way to do it, according to the left, was defund the police. That's what we were told would bring about a better future for all communities, but particularly those predominantly minority communities that often suffer from disproportionate rates of crime, where there's high crime areas of major cities. And that was the storyline as the riots were happening, as the media was covering this with fervor. And now we know what the last 12 months have actually brought us. If we look at what has gone on here, there was a spike in murders, in homicides, that you can directly correlate to. I mean, you can look right on a timeline, look at where the numbers are pointing. Right after the return of the BLM movement and its prominence all across the country, you had many more people being shot on the streets of American cities. In fact, leading to a horrific 3-digit percentage increases in a lot of major cities across America. Heather McDonald today in the Wall Street Journal takes particular interest in the situation of Minneapolis, which is where the George Floyd incident happened, and also where there were riots afterwards, and it was the beginning of the burgeoning BLM resurgence. She writes in the Wall Street Journal today, 19 children in Minneapolis have been shot this year, an increase of 171% over the same period in 2020. Their relatives wonder where the protesters are. Why ain't nobody mad about a 10-year-old, my grandson, fighting for his life, asked Sherry Jennings, LaDavian's grandmother, at a May 17th mayoral event. Because a cop didn't shoot him. Is that why? This is a question that a lot of people who approach the issue of both criminal justice reform and law enforcement with good faith. They want to know, why is it that those who call for police reform, or those who call for a different approach to criminal justice, spend so little time or even no time on the actual rise in violence in communities across the country, but would much rather focus on the very small, by the numbers, incidences of lethal police use of force that are not justified under law. Essentially excessive force resulting in death, murder by cop in some circumstances. That's incredibly rare given there are 330 million people in this country. The last year for which we have full statistics, 2019, there were about 14 unarmed African Americans killed by police, total. But we're told that this is the issue of our time, and that all the other violence that's going on seems to recede into the background. The activists, the left, the media, the Democrat Party, no real interest, or at least not nearly the same kind of interest, in dealing with that issue. So Heather McDonald continues to write about this in her Wall Street Journal piece today. Minneapolis homicides between January 1st and last week are up 108% compared with the same period in 2020. Shootings were up 153% and carjackings 222%. The crime increase began after Floyd's death and has never let up. That is something that we should have a reckoning with in this country, that the BLM movement's rise coincided with, and many would argue, caused the changes in policing and attitudes toward police as well, that has resulted in a tremendous spike in homicides, in deaths of innocents all across the country. And it is not just Minneapolis, that's just one example of it, because that is where the George Floyd incident happened. There are murals to George Floyd in Minneapolis, across the country, and in fact around the world. He has become a martyr for this BLM movement. So the situation of Minneapolis, the city where this all got started, where police reform, defund the police, in fact, was the rallying cry, it's worth looking at what's going on there. But it's not only in Minneapolis where they've had a huge spike in homicides. It's also across the country. As McDonald writes, as lawless as Minneapolis has become, it is hardly atypical. Drive-by shootings and homicides jumped nationwide during and after the Floyd riots. Homicides rose 50% in Chicago in 2020, 46% in New York City, and 38% in Los Angeles. The U.S. saw the largest annual percentage increase in homicides in recorded history in 2020. That increase has continued in 2021. So 50% in Chicago, 46% New York City, 38% Los Angeles. Those are the kinds of numbers that in normal times, in a more normal political climate, would cause chiefs of police and mayors even to lose their jobs. But it happened all across the country. So they want us to believe that it's because of the pandemic. Well, that seems like obviously faulty logic, because the pandemic, if you think about it, should have resulted in far less violence, far fewer shootings, because people are interacting with each other less. They're stuck at home. They aren't going to bars and clubs, and there's not as much human-to-human contact. And in fact, other countries around the world, the UK, Canada, saw substantial decreases in homicides and violent crime during the pandemic. So that can't be the explanation here. So what is? It seems most likely, and this is a very contentious point, that it's what, in fact, Heather McDonald coined the phrase, is called the Ferguson effect. Ferguson effect being that law enforcement, when they know they no longer have the political backing of those in power, and when much of the public has turned against them because of the false narrative of racist, destructive police, aren't as willing to do their jobs and take the risks they need to keep the public safe, because they know they are not supported and protected in the pursuit of their duties. And that results in higher crime. That results in people being less safe. It results in innocent men, women, and children, and disproportionately innocent men, women, and children who are minorities, suffering the consequences of this liberal virtue signaling, which is so much of what is driving the BLM movement as well.